Hi everyone. In this tutorial, I'll be covering masking in Photoshop. I'll show you how to create masks with different selection tools, using the gradient tool, and also using paintbrushes. Alright, let's get started. We use masks in Photoshop as a way to erase parts of our image in a non-destructive way. And what I mean by that is when we erase it out with a mask, we can always add it back in if you're not happy with it. As opposed to using your eraser tool, where when you erase pixels, there's no way to get those back with that. And that's why we use masks. It's non-destructive. Okay, so the first mask I'm going to show you is a clipping mask, and that's one we already went over in a previous tutorial. So a clipping mask is where you mask over one image with another one, and it's only going to mask on the pixels that are visible, not over anything that's transparent. So like I mentioned before, this checkerboard pattern here means that all of those pixels are transparent, so there's nothing there. The only pixels we have are the letters in the text here. So I'm going to turn on this image above them, and so I just want it to cover the text. Right now it's covering everything. So if I have my image selected, and I hold down Alt or Option on a Mac, and then just hold my cursor right in between the two layers. If you go too low or too high, you'll just get that selection icon. So hold right in between, holding Option or Alt, and then click. And so that's going to make a clipping mask. So that's masking out all of these pixels and just covering up what was showing underneath it. All right, so that's how you do a clipping mask, which we already covered. I'll just exit out of that one. Now I'll show you how to do masks with some of the different selection tools. So our selection tools are down here. We have our Marquee Select, and if you click and hold on it, you have different options for a rectangle or an elliptical one. We also have our Lasso tool, our Polygonal Lasso tool, and the Magnetic Lasso tool, and I'll show you what all those do. And then we have our Quick Selection tool and our Magic Wand tool, and we'll be going over those as well. So these are some of the different ways you can select parts of your image. So I'll just show you how to do that now. With our Marquee Select here, we can select any part of the image you want, and when you have it selected, that means we have just these pixels in here selected. So if you wanted to, with our layer selected, we can always cut or copy these pixels. So if you just go up to Edit and Cut, and now we're just cutting those out. So this is something you don't want to do because we're not masking, we're cutting parts of our image out. So this is a destructive way to delete out parts of our image. I'm just going to undo that. I'll show you can also copy. So I'm going to do the shortcut, which is Control or Command C, and I just copied those, and now I'll paste them. So what it did is paste those pixels in the exact same place. So you're not going to see a difference yet. I'll just go to my Move tool. We have our new layer where we pasted it, and if I grab that, that's what we pasted in. I'll just undo that. Now to deselect this marquee that you have, you can go back to your Marquee tool and just click off. Or if you have a selection, you can come up to Select and then hit Deselect. And then if you want to reselect a selection after you've deselected it, come up to Select and hit Reselect. You can also inverse a selection. So if I have this selected, I can go to Select, Inverse. And now what it's doing, it's selecting everything outside of this box. So if I hit Cut, Control X, it's going to cut out everything outside of the box. I'll just undo that, and I will deselect that. Okay, we also have our lasso tools here, which we can use for selecting. And you can get to those by using the shortcut key L. So with our lasso tool, you can draw with your mouse exactly what you want to select. So you can just drag and draw. And kind of like our paths, you want to make sure you go all the way to close it. If you don't do that, I'm just going to deselect this, and the shortcut for deselecting is Control or Command D. So I'm going to deselect that. So if I don't complete my path and just draw like that, it's going to automatically do the rest. Deselect that. So what you can do is draw all the way around, and then come up right to the end, and then just let go, and it'll fill in the rest. So just get it as close as you want it to be. And I'll deselect that. So you can select, like if I just want to come in and roughly select the flower from in here, you can just draw around it. Select my Move tool, and I've cut out the flower with the Lasso tool. I'm going to undo that with Control Z, and then I'll deselect it with Control D. Okay, so that's the lasso tool. So that one's kind of rough to draw on because you're just drawing with your mouse. But if you're using a tablet to draw with, then it's going to be easier. You can use a pen and actually draw it right on your tablet. The other one below it is the Polygonal Lasso tool. This is a nice one because you can create straight lines with this tool. So if I want to just cut out my frame here, I can click up on the corner here and then let go of my mouse and it's still attached here, kind of like with the paths in Illustrator. And then so I can drag it to the end here, click again at this corner, bring it down here, click again, bring it over to this corner, and then close it up. And then like with the paths, you see that little circle appear by the lasso, and that means to close it. So I'm going to click and close it. And now I've selected around the frame here. Okay, so what if we want to create a mask? We don't want this blue behind it. We just want the frame. So we already have the frame selected, which is good, and we're going to mask out this stuff. So it's going to create a mask and cover up that blue without actually deleting it. So what you want to do is make sure you have your layer selected, and then you want to come down to this icon here, and that is the Add Layer Mask icon. So if I click that, it's going to create a mask, and it masked out the blue around it here. And so I can see my mask right there. The properties for my mask are up here, and if this panel isn't showing up for you, just come up to Window and select Properties. And that's going to drop it in there. And sometimes all of your options might not be visible, so if it's like this and you can't see all of them, you can just grab your Layers panel and drag it down and reveal everything in your Properties panel. So with your mask selected, you have to click on the icon here to select it. With this one, I'm just selecting the actual image. So if you're adjusting your mask, you want to make sure you have your mask selected here. You have some options here, and I'll go over those more with some of the other masks, but here's one you can use to invert your mask. If I click that, it's going to invert it, so now it's masking out the frame and revealing the blue that we masked out originally. So I'm just going to invert that and flip it back. Okay, and that was with your Polygonal Lasso tool, which is a nice one for creating straight lines. We also have the Magnetic Lasso tool, and what that's going to do is kind of snap to an edge that it sees in Photoshop. So say we want to mask out this part. I can click here and then just drag, and I'm not holding my mouse, but as I drag, you can see that it's snapping along these pixels. So you just kind of drag as you go, and the magnet tool snaps it. And then like with your Polygonal Lasso tool, you'll see the little circle beside it to close up your shape. So that's another nice way to select parts of your image, and it works really well for just snapping along lines. I'll just deselect that, and I'll try it on the flower here. So I'm going to zoom in, and then just drag along. So you can see it's having a hard time with this one just because it's a blurrier photo and it's not as contrasted here, so it's having a hard time seeing where the blue pixels end and where this flower starts. So it might not work really well for something like this. If you want to end this selection without finishing it, you can just hit Enter. So this is a tool you probably don't want to use to select this in this instance. All right, I'm just going to zoom back out. If you want to add to your existing mask or remove from it, you can do that by using your black and white paint. The black is going to remove and mask out parts of your image, and the white is going to add it back in. So I'll just show you a quick example of that. We'll use the brushes more for other ones, but in this one, I'll show you with the paint bucket tool. So to get to your paint bucket tool, it's going to be this icon here. It's nested under the gradient tool, so you might see this one first. So you can just click and hold and select your paint bucket tool. You can also use the shortcut key G to get to it. Okay, so now we have our paint bucket. I'm going to go up to my Marquee Select, and I'm going to select this image here that we want to mask out. So with that selected, we're going to take our paint bucket, and we're going to fill this whole area with paint. You want to make sure that you have the mask selected. If we have our image selected, it's going to try fill in parts of the image. I'm going to undo all of those and make sure I select my mask icon. Now I'm going to fill it with white. That doesn't do anything because white adds to your mask. So we want to switch it to black, and you can do that by just selecting these here. So that's going to switch it. If you have color set in these, to get it back to black and white, you just have to select this icon here and it'll switch them back. Okay, so switch it over to black, and a quick way to do that is with the shortcut key X. And what that does is switch back and forth to black and white. And that's nice for when you're refining your mask and want to delete a little bit, but then add back in. You can just quickly switch back between the two. Okay, so now with our black paint selected, we'll just click with our fill bucket, and it's going to fill the entire selection here over the mask and mask out what we have. If I go hit X to switch back to white, we click and we mask it right back in. All right, so that's one way to create masks using your Marquee Select and your Lasso tools. I'm going to go over to this flower one, and now I'm going to show you the quick selection tool. This is one I use a lot for masking. It's right here with the shortcut key W. If you click on it, we have the quick selection tool and the magic wand tool. I'll show you both of those. So what the quick selection tool does, it allows you to click and it's going to create masks for you wherever you drag. So I have it on here and I'm just going to click, and you see it starts to make a selection there where I clicked. So you can just click and drag, and it's going to snap to the edge here where it sees a contrast in the pixels. And then you can just keep on dragging across. Now if you go too far and select pixels you don't want to mask out, you can hit this button up here, which is going to subtract from your selection. So I'll click that, I'll come back down and just go over that part, and you can clean it up like that. And I'll go back to my add. And I'm just going to drag over these. So this works better on images that have a lot of contrast, so it can see I need to stop at the pink when I'm selecting the green. Okay, so that's a quick way to select all of that. And a shortcut to get between the plus and minus is just to hold Alt or Option on a Mac, and that's going to switch it to a minus icon, and you can see it changing in the little shape there. So with that selected, I can minus from it, or I can let go and add back to it. And so if you have stuff like this, you just want to go over it and add it back to your selection. Now I went over a little too far there, so I can hit minus and just clean that up, and then come in here and clean up that edge as well. If you want to make your brush icon bigger or smaller, you can come up to the top here and then go to the size and scroll that up, and it's going to make it larger. Or you can use the shortcut keys, or you can use the bracket keys on your keyboard as a shortcut. So the left bracket makes it smaller, and the right bracket makes it bigger. And then with it selected, you can come down to your mask here and mask it out. So now what this did is masked out the flower when actually we want to mask out the background. So like we did with the other one, we're going to want to invert this. So we have our properties here with our mask selected. I'll hit invert, and now we have our flower. And you can see some edges here that we're going to need to clean up. And so that's where we can use a black and white brush and come in and clean up those edges. And I'll show you how we do that. Okay, so I'm going to select my paintbrush, which is this icon here, or you can use the shortcut key B. So I'll just click on that, and that's going to bring up my brush. Right now it's really small, so like with the quick selection brush, you can use your brackets to make it bigger. So I'll just show you how to use the paintbrush before we start using it to fix our mask. I'm going to create a new layer to paint on, and then I'll just hide this one here. Okay, so with my brush selected, I can choose a color. Since this is transparent right now, we can paint white over it if we want, or we can switch it and paint black. And you can double click on it, just like in Illustrator, and pick your colors. We also have our swatches up here, and you can pick colors through there. And you can come up to Window and select your swatches. And like in Illustrator, we have the eyedropper tool for selecting paint colors. So I'm just going to quickly paint a color. I'll change it to a different color. And now we can select this purple with our eyedropper here. If you just click on it and grab that color, it'll select this purple. A shortcut and an easy way to do that is just hold Alt when you have your brush out, and that's going to open your eyedropper. So if you're painting, you can just quickly grab another color and paint like that. I'm going to just undo all of these. So with that brush, we were using a soft round brush, and to get to your different brushes, you come up to this icon up here. So you click the little drop down menu, and we have some options here. So you could adjust the size in here and the hardness of the brush, and that's going to adjust the hardness of the edge. So this is a soft brush, so you can see it's nice and soft around the edges, and then this one here is a hard brush, and so that we have a hard edge. There's also going to be some different brush presets in here, but we probably won't be using those for the most part. You'll probably just be using these brushes to refine your masks. Okay, so I'm just going to click out of there, and I'll undo these. Okay, when you're painting with your brush, I'm just going to make this a little smaller with my bracket key, and I'll go back to my black and white. So when you're painting with your brush, you just click and hold to paint, and everything I'm painting is going on this new layer I created here. If I want to switch it over to white, just do it like that. If you hold shift while you paint, it's going to make a straight line. If you paint first and then click shift, it's going to make the straight line mid-stroke. And then if you just click your brush down, select shift, and then click somewhere else, it's going to make a straight line. And then you can keep on clicking and adding to that line. We'll mostly only be using our brush for refining our masks in Photoshop, but you can also do really nice paintings in Photoshop with your brush. All right, I'm just going to delete out this layer. I'll select it and hit my trash can icon here and select yes, and I'll turn this back on. So now with my brush, I'm going to kind of just clean up my edges a little bit. So I'm going to make sure I have my mask selected. If you don't and you just have the flower selected, you're going to paint right on it. So I'll select my mask, and I'm going to zoom in on here, and I want to use my black brush. If I use my white, I'm going to add back in parts of the mask that are already gone. So I'm going to switch over to my black, and I'll paint this part out. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller, and then come and just paint in here. So this is what I mean by being able to switch back and forth from your black and white really quickly. Because if I'm painting and I accidentally go too far, I want to just hit X, switch over to my white paint, and then fill that back in, switch back to black paint, and clean up those edges. And I'm going to look closely at your edges when you mask, so make sure you have them as clean as you can get them. Zoom right in and just clean them up. And I'll show you some other ways to refine them as well. Okay, so now we have this one masked out. Let's try it with this one, and let's see what our other options are under here. We have our magic wand tool. Now this one might not work really well with this one. It works better with images that have a really high contrast and not as many colors in the background that you want to mask out. So I'm just going to click with this one, and what it's doing is selecting everything that's close to this pixel color that I selected with it. So if I select green over here, it's going to select everything in this green range. If I select the black, it's going to select all the black over here. I'll just undo those, and we can come and select from here as well. So it's selecting all the white, and if I hold shift, I can add to my selection. So it's selecting all the white. We want to get some of this yellow in. I'll keep holding shift and add that in. So it's going to be hard to mask this out with the magic wand tool because it's not selecting all of the colors we want. So if I were to mask this right now, we're going to lose all of that. Now you could go in and try to paint in all of that, but that's going to be pretty time consuming. So I wouldn't recommend using the magic wand tool for this one. You probably want to use your quick select tool. So I'm just going to undo that, and I'm going to deselect it with Control D. And let's try use our quick selection tool for this. I'm going to make it a little smaller and just go around the flower. So this tool works really well for this image. Just a few clicks and it's already selected. I have a little bit there that I can select. I'm going to make this a little smaller. Hold down Alt to minus from my selection and then click in there. Now it went a little too far, so I'll click back. So it's a lot of back and forth and just refining your masks that way. So now that it's selected, I'm going to hit the mask button, and again it masks out the flower when we want to mask out the background. So I'm just going to hit invert, and then you can come in and clean these up too and get in there and clean those up. So I'm just going to undo that and show you what I can do with this. So it's selected around the outside and around my flower, so I know it's not going to mask out the flower, it's going to mask out everything around here. So instead of doing masking it and then inverting it in here, you can also go up to select and inverse it from there. And so now it flipped it, so it's just around the flower. And then we can come down and create our mask. All right, I'm going to try use the magic wand tool on this one. Since this image is really nice and contrasted against the plain white background, in this instance, the magic wand should work really well. All right, so I'm just going to click with it on this white, and so it should select every pixel that's really close to this white color. So I'm going to click and see it selected it nice and clean all the way around the vase. This button here, if you have it clicked off, when you click, so I'll just click off the side here to deselect it. When you click, it's not going to stop at the edge here. It's also going to select pixels inside, so it selected the white around here. And I don't want that. I just want the white around it. So I'm just going to deselect that. Make sure I have that clicked and click again. So now it's just selecting around the vase. Now I can just hit my mask button here. And again, I know it's going to mask out this part since it's selected around here. If I wanted to mask out just the vase, I would select the vase first. But since this was easier to select, I select that, mask it, and invert it. So I'm going to mask it. It's going to mask out the vase. And then I'm just going to hit invert. And now we have the vase masked out and all transparent behind it. So now you can take this, make it smaller. And then I can drop in these flowers. And since they're masked out now, we can see the vase underneath it. I'm just going to use Control T to do a free transform. I can drop those in. Have this one here as well. If I click and drag it over to my vase layer, drop it in. It's huge, so I'll do Control T to do a free transform. And I couldn't see the edges because it's too big, so I need to make sure I zoom out, and now I can see them. So then I just want to hold Shift so it'll scale it proportionally, and then I can drop it over. So sometimes when you create your mask, you might see lines like this that didn't get masked out. And that line was because it went right to the edge of the page and those pixels didn't get masked. So I can see that line there, and I think it's attached to this one. If I see this in your project, I'm going to ask you to go in and clean those up. And an easy way to see where you have lines like that is just to create a solid colored layer and put it at the very bottom, and then you can kind of see where your masks are lacking. And I'll just show you how I do that. So I'm going to create a new layer, and then I want to drop it to the very bottom of everything. So I'm going to drag it down to the bottom of my layers and put it at the very bottom. And then I'm going to take my paint bucket tool, and I want to fill that layer with a color. So let's go with something like that. And I'll just hit fill. Okay, so now I can see where my masks need cleaning. So the vase has a line all the way across it, and that was because it filled this whole section and just didn't catch that last row of pixels. So let's clean that one up first. I'm going to turn off those two, and so you can just see the line here. So that's an easy fix. We'll just switch it over to black and white. We'll select our brush by using the shortcut B. Now we have our brush on. We want to use black, and now we can just paint over this. And like I mentioned earlier, if we hold Shift while we paint, it's going to paint a perfectly straight line. So let's make sure we're on our mask layer for our vase. And we'll come up to this line here, click, and then just drag across it. And since I'm holding down Shift, it doesn't matter where my icon is, it's still painting across it. Click on it here, drag straight down, paint across this line and that line. And now we painted those out. We can check our other ones. I'm just going to pan across here. This one looks good. I don't see any edges on it. And then this one, we have an edge right there and a little bit up here. This might be easier to see on a black background. So what I'm going to do is select my layer here on the bottom, go back to my paint bucket, which is with G, and then fill that with black. And now it's easier to see these lines here that I'm missing. So I'm going to click on that mask up there, go back to my brush, I have it on black, and I'll just paint out that part of the mask. Okay, and then I can just turn this off, and now I know my masks are totally clean. Okay, up next I'll show you how to do a gradient mask. We'll go over to this image here. Okay, since you can remove a mask with black and white, you can also use a gradient, since it's going to remove anything in between black and white. So all of that gray in between, it'll also remove, but it won't remove it all the way. So solid black removes everything, solid white adds it back in, and anything in between will make a semi-transparent mask. And I'll show you what I mean by that with just the brushes real quick. So I'm going to turn off this layer for now, and I'm going to create a mask on my sky. Okay, so you don't have to make a selection first to make a mask. I can just have that sky selected and hit my mask icon. Nothing is going to mask out because I didn't have anything selected, but it created a mask here that I could click on, and now I can paint in parts of it or paint them out. So I'm going to use my black and white brushes here, and I'll just show you what I mean when I say you don't have to use a solid black or white to bring in part of your image. So with your brush, up here you have the opacity. So with a black brush at 100%, it's going to completely remove those pixels. If I bring this down to about 50%, then it's only masking out part of the image. You can still see some of it there. And I can lower it to take out even less, and we're just barely seeing that transparent checkerboard pattern through there. I'm just going to delete out this mask and show you how to make masks with gradients. So to delete it, I'm just going to right click on it, and you can either disable it, and that'll turn it off, and we get the X through it if it's disabled, and you can re-enable it, or I can delete it by just right clicking and then doing delete mask, and it'll completely get rid of it. Okay, so a gradient mask you can use when you don't need a really hard, sharp edge on your mask. You just want a nice soft gradation. So for something like this, I have two images of skies. I want to put this sky into this image here. So what I'm going to do is select this image, and I'm going to mask out this sky. And I can do that with my gradient tool because it's going to go from black and white and mask out everything in between there. Okay, so with my background selected, I'm going to put a mask on it, even though I have nothing selected in it here yet. I'll create my mask. Now I have a mask on this layer. So you want to go to your paint bucket tool, hold on it, and make sure you have your gradient tool selected. You can also get to it with the shortcut G, but it's going to bring up whichever tool is selected here. So just make sure the gradient one is selected. You have options like in Illustrator for different types of gradients. So you have a round one, you have an angle one, a reflected one, and then the diamond one. You're probably going to want to use the linear gradient, which goes from black to white in a line. Here you have your gradient options. We have different colors in here, but we're going to want to use black and white since black and white is what adds and removes from the mask. So I'm just going to click on this one, and then I'll click off. Okay, so like with Illustrator, all you have to do now is draw in your gradient. And so you can draw it in like that. And what that did, since black removes it and white adds to it, you can see it down here what it's doing. It's adding the black on the bottom, and then the white is gradating up to the top. So what we're doing is removing everything at the bottom that's in black and slowly revealing up to the sky where this is in white. So this, we have it the wrong way. We're going to want the black on top and the white on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is just undo that real quick with Control Z, and we'll try again. So we're going to start at the top this time, and I'll start to draw it down. So now we're starting to remove some of the sky, and it just softly feathers it towards the ground here. And we can keep doing it now. If we just click again, get a little more of a gradation. We can click again, a little more. And then if you want, you can just even do little quick lines here just to kind of feather it out there. And just kind of soften it. Right here we're losing a little too much of the land. So I'm going to undo that. Maybe undo one more. And then just try soften it a little more. So you just want to softly go over it until you get something you like. And then what you can do is drop in the sky that we're going to replace it with. So I'll just turn that one on. Right now it's over top. I want it to go underneath. So I'm going to select it and drop it below. So now we have this new sky in here. We're getting a little bit of a blend with the old clouds, but since we're just replacing one sky with another, they blend in nicely to each other with the gradient tool. So this is an instance where you might not want to use such a sharp edge, but a nice soft feather for your mask to blend two images. Another type of way you can do a nice soft mask like this is with a soft round brush instead of a gradient. So I'm just going to delete out this one real quick, and we'll start again. So I have my old sky here. I'll leave this one on underneath, so as I paint it, it's going to reveal it underneath. So we're going to create a new mask on that top layer, and then I'm going to select my brush, and I already have it on black, so it's going to erase out part of the mask. So right now it's a hard round brush, so we have a hard edge on it. You can see the clouds underneath. What we want is a soft brush. So I'll select a soft brush here, and it removes it nice and softly. Okay, I'm just going to make this brush bigger and start to paint across the top of the sky here. So it's adding to it. And if your brush is really big, it's going to be really big and soft on the edge. So for the one you get closer to the bottom here, I'll just undo that. You probably want to make it a little smaller. And then just come in and paint that out. Something like that. And that's a way to use the brush or the gradient tool if you want to just do a nice soft feathered mask. You can also do this with faces if you want to have them just softly blended into a background. You don't always have to be using the selection tools to make a hard edged mask. Okay, when I say I want you to be masking instead of erasing, I'll show you why. I'm just going to delete out this mask really quick. And then I'm going to duplicate this layer. And I'm going to do that by right clicking on it and going up to duplicate layer. And then I'll hit OK. So what that does is make a copy of it. I'm going to turn off this one. So now I have two sky layers, and they're just stacked on top of each other. Okay, so if I don't use a mask for this and I erase it, I'm going to put this one on underneath so we can see it as I erase it. I can come in here with my eraser tool, which is right here, the eraser tool, and I can make it bigger, like with my paintbrush using my bracket key. And again, I can use a hard or a soft eraser, so I'll just use a soft one. And I'm just showing you this as an example. Do not erase. You have to be using masks. Okay, so then I'm just going to go in and then erase out. So what it's doing is erasing out like we did with the mask. So we're getting the same result we wanted, but we can't go back in now and re-add these pixels that we erased. So if we erase too far, when we have a mask, we would just go in with the white brush and add it back in. But since we erased it, we're never going to be able to get those pixels back. So always make sure you're creating masks and never erasing. All right, I'll just show you one more example on a person where we have some hair and it might be harder to mask. So this background here is actually pretty consistent in color, so we might want to try the Magic Wand tool for this. I'm going to make sure I have the Ryan Reynolds layer selected, grab my Magic Wand tool, and just try it out. So you might want to just try experimenting which way of masking you're going to want to try depending on the image you have. So I'll just use this tool here. And yeah, since the background is close to one color, it selected most of it really nicely here. So let's go with that. I know this isn't masked out yet, but instead of trying to use my Magic Wand tool to add to the selection, I'll just brush that out later. Okay, so now that it's selected, I'll just hit my mask icon here. It's going to mask him out, and I have this image underneath him. So we just want to click on that and hit invert. Now we have him masked out on this colorful background. So we can see some issues in here. We'll go in and fix those, and in the hair here. But first let's start by fixing this here. So with my mask selected, I'm going to select my brush, and it's on black. So I can just paint that out. And then let's see if we zoom in. So we have some issues on the edge of our mask here and in here. First, I'm going to show you how to refine the edge of your mask through the properties here. So let's take a look at the ear that we might want to clean up and some of the edges. If we go on the side here to select and mask, it's going to select our mask in this separate window. So what we can do here is select how we view it. We can do onion skin, and that's just going to lower the opacity of the background. We can do marching ants, which the mask selection, since they're moving, they nicknamed it marching ants. So that's what that is. It's just showing your mask selection around it. You can show it on an overlay or on black, on white. You can see what the mask looks like as just black and white, and then over the layers. I think I'll view it with the overlay here because it gives me a good idea of what the edges of the mask look like. Okay, I'm just going to click off of that and then come down here. We're not going to use edge detection for this. We're going to go into our global refinements and try to fix this edge a little bit. So if we use the smooth one here, we can slide that, and you can see it's just smoothing out these pixels. So you want to kind of smooth those out a bit. Not too much, just somewhere that looks nice. So we've smoothed those pixels out, but now we have kind of this glowy haze around him. And with that, we can use our shift edge here, but first I'll show you what these other ones do. So the feather is going to feather out and just smooth out that edge. So if it's a really hard, jagged edge, you can feather it with that. We have contrast, which is going to pretty much do the opposite of feather. So if you have a soft mask, you can do contrast, and it's going to just tighten it up. I'll put those both back down. And then we have shift edge here. And what that does, right now it's at 0%. You can shift it by dragging it in any direction. So right now it's shifting it out and making that edge bigger. And if we go the other way, we can kind of drag it in a bit. So you can use these to smooth out your mask. So I recommend using the smooth one to just get it to a nice smooth place. Smooths out all of that. I'm going to smooth it, and then I'm going to shift my edge over. That's looking good. And then we can come in here and clean up some of this. All right, I'm going to hit OK. And so that cleaned up that edge. Now we have kind of a hard edge on the hair. Hair is always going to be a little tricky to do, but what I like to do is just go in there with a brush and just kind of paint in my edges and try to make it look natural. So I'm just going to lower the size of this brush, switch it over to my white one, and then I can just kind of paint it back in. And I just want to kind of soften the edge a bit. And you can just soften it up like that. All right, so just remember, you want to make sure you're masking and not erasing, and you have lots of different ways to mask. You can be selecting with your Marquee select, you can use your Lasso tools to select, you can use your quick selection, which I recommend, and your magic wand tool, which only works in some instances really well. And then use those to select. You can use your gradient tool to mask, your brushes to mask, and to clean up your edges. And also come in here, select and mask, and that will help you refine the edges as well. All right, that's going to cover it for this tutorial on masking.